There we go. All right, we are live, almost.
I'm not seeing it on Facebook yet.
So it says it's preparing.
Okay. And you're going on the iCollective page?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
All right. Where is Linda? Great, we are live here. Let me make sure that we are live. On Facebook. It says that it's live on Facebook.
Still not seeing it here.
Great, everyone can hear us. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Let's try again. All right, where is Linda?
I don't know, man. I messaged.
How's everyone doing out there? We have about 100 people already. Let me see, anyone from the iCollective joining us? David. Hey, David. Hi, Amani. How you doing?
Hey, Amani.
Let's see who else is here. Hi, Annie from San Miguel de Allende. I see a lot of familiar names here. Great. Let us know where you're joining us from. Vermont, Oregon, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Berkeley, Alaska, San Diego, Hawaii, Massachusetts. Hi, Katia. Katia from Kata. All right, now let us let's make this fun. Tell us whose territory you are living on. There you go. Ohlone, Ho-Chunk, Lenape. There you go. You guys did your homework. Mi'kmaq, more Lenape, I guess California, Anishinaabe. Chumash, that's near Oxnard, right? The mountains up there. Umatilla. Great. Fantastic. All right, so Carlos, while we wait for Linda, did you bring anything that you harvest?
No, but I could run downstairs and get like 30 things if you want.
So I'm gonna share what I have really close to me. Can anyone see that? Wild
Nice.
Ones. I've been harvesting a little bit for the last 3 weeks. I still haven't found any mushrooms yet, but I also been at the farm, so I haven't been able to go look for for many hours. What have you been harvesting, Carlos?
Oh, we're on the tail end of the wild carrots. It's a chashtezhi. Really fascinating plant. It starts with you get like this really low creeper on the ground about this big with some kind of carrot-like leaves, but it's in the parsley family. And then you get into the tuber and you're looking at anywhere between 1 and 2 feet long. And so we've been doing those. They're just coming to the end. We've just been harvesting greens because the ground's getting too hard. You can't really get it without breaking. The desert onions are just starting to flower. So we're kind of stepping away from those right now. The mountain onions are popping right now. Spring beauties are popping right now. Then we've been doing these guys right here. If I can get one. So this is the wild rhubarb.
What does it taste like?
Like rhubarb? No. Yeah, it tastes it tastes like rhubarb, but definitely has that dark sourness to it, and it's a little bit lighter. It doesn't have. It'll definitely shock your mouth. And that's it right now.
And you went fishing today?
We attempted to. We went to a lake I've never fished at, and it was so rocky. All we did was lose a few lures, and then we took off to another spot. It's got real nice fish in it, and my son broke his pole in half, getting it snagged out there, and that was about it. Called it on that one.
Okay, so I have a bunch of questions already, and someone raised their hand. Someone said we're harvesting red willow for. I'm not gonna attempt to pronounce that. And birch trees to top. Trout lilies are out, although the trout lilies that I saw last weekend, so I don't know if it was deer or something is eating the flowers. I know the twilight's gonna be a little bit late as well, so why don't we just get started? So how you doing, Carlos?
Doing good, man. Just trying to get the farm ready for we're planting, and we got been working on we fenced in think about like 0.15 acres. Just finished the fence up this morning, hanging the gate. We're gonna get some Navajo churro over here this week. So just getting ready, man. It's almost that time.
So can you tell us exactly what you, because I know that you're not doing traditional agriculture.
Right. All kinds of different, let's see what's going on out here. I mean, it's just like there's real simple things that people kind of don't really, if you're not from the Southwest in particular, where, all we have is wind. And it's either you're in the desert or you're in the high desert. And we get 300 plus days of sun a year. And it's a pretty brutal environment to grow in. And even something as simple as corn, where people grow, kind of not necessarily a monocrop, but you would grow corn in a line, right? Whereas we grow it with numerous seeds in one hole. That creates a bush that's actually pretty low. Like I've been around the country in different tribal communities and seen their corn that's 11, 12 feet tall. Ours gets 3.5 feet, 4 tops, and just real bushy. And the reasoning for that planting method is that bush holds together and the plant doesn't have to fight the wind, right? So, so those kind of things like that, and making sure that you're planting windbreaks so the little plants can survive, which is, we're doing that as a rice grass in some circumstances, in like some parts of the field as a secondary crop, as well as for pollinators, and have a little wild potato plot that I'll just use it for seed, really, just for transplanting back up into the mountains and things like that. And there's a lot of different stuff going on.
Great. So what's your altitude? Are you close to Durango right now?
Yeah, we're in Mancos. We're at 7101.
So that's pretty high. Massachusetts is pretty low. I think the highest is like 1,500 or something.
Right.
It's really low. We have a question here. Let's answer some questions while we wait for Linda. What is your relationship with nature and the outdoors like? I want to bring in indigenous practices and ways of honoring indigenous folks to outdoor education spaces. In parentheses, in addition to land acknowledgements. So let me answer that one first, and then you can.
Yeah, please do.
Well, first of all, let's explain indigenous protocol a little bit. For myself, I live in Massachusetts, so I live in the Northeast. I live in Nipmuc territory, but I'm an indigenous person that is not from these territories. Therefore, I will never have a say on this land, right? I'm a guest, just like everyone else around the country is a guest. I'm originally from southern Mexico, from the Mixteco Nation, and that's where my ancestors are from. And that's a little. If we're talking about that region, if we're talking about Oaxaca, that's a little bit different. When it comes to land acknowledgements, I think my personal opinion, and also talking to elders, talking to tribal leaders, it feels like a fad. It feels like a fashion. That is just one of those things that people do to check in the box, but never really follow up. So my opinion about land acknowledgements is that if you continue to do land acknowledgements without actually land reparations, you're just part of the problem, and it's empty promises. That's just my opinion, nothing else. What's your take, Carlos?
Well, I was going to say hashtag land back, when it comes to that conversation. That's real. As far as protocol is concerned, getting to the root of colonization, right? I think I always explain when I'm teaching, to youth in particular about like imagine as a people, and this is in reference to white people, to initial waves of colonization. Like imagine through Christianity in that aspect over there, really destroying the medicine tradition, the medicine people, and the medicine ways in Europe, right? And displacing the indigenous people and creating this different scenario away from land, away from land and place, So imagine that, you dug up your roots and you chopped them up and you lit them on fire and you hopped on the boat over here, right? And you get here, and instead of learning the land, you fight its people, you destroy its habitats, you destroy its animals, you destroy everything, right? That gets in the way of your being. So it's like, what does it take for you to really acknowledge where you are? Right? Like, how deep do you have to dig to even grasp that understanding? And you can't really have those conversations until you, like Neftali just said, that land acknowledgement concept, right? If there's no reparations, if there is not land coming back into indigenous hands, into indigenous people, it is all just empty, in my view as well. So, I don't know if until there's real cultural exchange, right? Until there's the people that are willing to root here alongside the indigenous people.
Right. So let's go back to the same question. The first part of that question said, I want to bring indigenous practice and way of honoring indigenous folks to outdoor education spaces. Is that possible?
Well, I mean, if not unless you're indigenous, right? I mean, are you bringing indigenous people into your space? You know what I mean? Like, is the indigenous way and the indigenous voice something for you to teach? Or right. is it, are you bringing people from that land?
Right. All right. So we answered that question pretty much. I have a question from David Rico, a brother from the iCollective. And David is asking, what is a better word to use instead of permaculture? And how are indigenous food pathways and permaculture opposed and related?
Love you, David. I think, permaculture, much like biodynamics, right? All of these catchphrases and these different terminologies, it's all from, white men going into indigenous community under the guise of anthropology, under the guise of archaeology and all these things. And then, pilfering the information and then selling it back to other white people, right? So, the two gentlemen that founded even the concept of permaculture, that was exactly what they did, right? It's what Michael Moore did here in the Southwest, right? He's the most well-known botanist in this region, and that's all he did was steal traditional information. So, I don't know, David, really, to answer your question, like, whatever your tribe, whatever your tribal word is for the one, for that connection, for being in harmony, being in that, what we call hojo, in that balance, then You know, I don't know if there's really a word, because when you exist in that way, there doesn't need to be terminology for it, right? That's just checking. That's just creating boxes.
And that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions, right, of the teachings when it comes to a lot of indigenous teachings specifically. We belong to our environment. We belong to the community. We belong to Mother Earth. We don't own, right? But in colonial way of thinking, people want to own land. People want to own nature, and I think that has always been really dangerous.
Right. I mean, that's the foundation of patriarchy, right? As soon as the land base is starting to be extracted from the people, and you start maintaining a ruling class, right, which is the history of Europe, right? That's where we get it. You know, I mean, that's what's been handed down.
So to answer David Rico's question, look to your community for teachings, right? We have another anonymous question. Do you have any suggestions for how to support land reparations, policy advocacy, and of course is important as well. So in the Northeast, there is People of Color effort. It's called the New England Farmers of Color Network. There's a website. It was started by Leah Penniman, myself, and a few other people, and is hopefully positioning indigenous people of the Northeast at the center of this conversation. So look that up. I know they did a webinar last week, and they did another one this week. All of this information is online. I know that there is another land trust that was started in the Bay Area. I'm not very familiar with it. The Mashpee Wampanoag also have a land trust to you can give them your land back. So look for my quick answer is look for indigenous led land trust, indigenous led projects that are legitimate to give land back. What's your take? Is there anything going on in the Southwest?
I mean, there's something in the works currently. I know Professor Devin Pena over in the San Luis Valley, which is like the Central Valley of Colorado, is through the Aseki Institute right now has, I believe, almost 200 acres that is slowly, working, and it's in a land trust now, but it's working towards being given back to the indigenous peoples of that region, which would be the Ute, the Dene, the Apache, in that area. So
another organization in the Northeast is the Eastern Woodlands Rematriation Project. That's Kristen Wyman, Olivia, Nia Holly, all of these really wonderful leaders. Please look them up. We can also send links to all of this. Let's go to another question, and this one is juicy. And I'm gonna preface this by saying that we're looking to do another webinar with friends from African American descent, probably, hopefully, including Leah Penniman. But the question is this: I'm curious about how African descendant people, like African Americans, Afro-Indigenous, Afro-Latinx, Afro-Caribbeans, fit into this paradigm. How can we be respectful when wildcrafting and healing our relationship to the land, especially when for many of us, our ancestors, labor was used to take land and utilize it for capital endeavors? This is a wonderful question. I think that one of the most important things and hard things to do around this issue is that we have to learn, one, how to trust each other, and two, how to work together. and there cannot be any talks about reparation with indigenous peoples at the table. And I think that oftentimes is missed in some conversations. What's your take, Carlos?
Yeah, that's a hell of a question. I mean, the race conversation here in America has always been black and white. You know, like historically, that's just been the conversation, is black and white. And I would say any place that you grew up in this things, whether you were on the res or in an urban area, rural areas, you know, what you're force fed in rural areas in particular, you know, just with the mainstream force feeding, the movies, the music, everything gives you the negative viewpoints, right? Like we all have that like beat into our brains against each other, you know, as people of color. And I think that, you know, from where I am, which is in Ignacio, and it's on from the Southern Ute Reservation, is, you know, there's a family there at home called the Taylors, and they're descendants of a freed slave. They married into the tribe, you know, and even though it's a really important tribal story, right? And it's really a point of pride for the descendants. You know, when I was growing up, his like direct descendants, you know, like they were still referred to by the N-word, right? And that's like getting through all of these conversations and getting through all of the tropes and through all of the program divisions, you know, is really, I think it's really, I don't know, I mean, it's a fascinating dialogue, and it has to happen. And it happened, you know, like your work with Soulfire, right? And with Leah up in that area. And, you know, here we have our activist core group here is extremely diverse, you know, and that's always a conversation that we're always in. But I always think back to an essay by Vine Deloria Jr. And he proposed what would it have been beneficial for African Americans to been given their reservations as far as keeping their culture and keeping all these things. And I always thought that was a really fascinating concept, because what he was saying there was that you have the ability to grow your connection to root, right, in that scenario. So, but I mean, I could ramble on about that for days. I think it's just, you know, as we move forward, we have to move forward together.
But it's also really important to recognize that this is ongoing work that is really hard, right? Since the inception of the I Collective, we have been working with our white allies. We have been really grateful to be invited by Amani, and by other Palestinian chefs and activists to the table to have conversations about food sovereignty from different perspectives. But it's ongoing work. It's ongoing work that is going to take multiple generations to figure out. It's not something that we're just going to have a retreat and figure this out. That is just my opinion. Let's see another question, but keep an eye out. Whoever has that question, keep an eye out, because we will be having a conversation with our black friends, brothers, sisters. Another question. Let's say someone is scared to ask this question, so let's see what it is. Okay, so someone asked that question, and this person said that they were kind of scared to ask this question with my name there. But thank you for answering. Great. Let's see another question or a comment. As an indigenous person from Taiwan, I want to return back my village. I want to return back to my village to learn, persevere indigenous environmental knowledge through intergenerational knowledge change. Any advice on how to approach this in a way that colonizes knowledge? This is a really cool question. Go ahead.
Will you repeat that one time?
This young person, indigenous from Taiwan, wants to return to their community. Any advice on how to approach this in a way that decolonizes knowledge?
Ooh. Well, I mean, I think the concept of decolonization is always really fascinating when it comes to tech, to traditional ecological knowledge. I think there's a lot to be said for, keeping it where it belongs. I think that that knowledge and those systems are in place for that place, right? Those cosmologies and that historical context of that indigenous people is for that region, right? It's very specific to. It's like, here we have very specific things, and just like all indigenous peoples in their place. I think that you'll find, even if you get home, and you manage to compile all of this information inside of yourself, that where you take it is going to redefine it either way. Like land base is going to define what you can do. So, I don't know if that really answers your question, but
what I have to add to that is that if you haven't been part of the community, whoever asked this question, if you haven't been part of your community, you really have to work to go and ask, to go and get to your community and really humbly ask if this is something that is needed or something that people even want. I always tell students this story, how some kids from an Ivy League decided that they were gonna go help people in Mexico, South America, you name it, and create a water, electric water station. And they didn't ask. So they create this water station. There's electricity coming to the village. What do you think people do with the electricity? They buy TVs and they start watching TV, and everyone that worked on that project was dismayed, right? Was dismayed because we thought this was going to be a good thing instead of watching instead of TVs. But things like this happen when you don't ask, when you don't really ask the community. If you would have asked women in those communities, maybe do you need a meal? Do you need a water pump? And then you specifically you specifically target those needs, then it's a little bit different. But in regards to the colonizing, I think that we have to learn how to humble ourselves and ask. Even as people of color, even as indigenous peoples, we have this mentality that we are the ones to solve issues, to lead, and oftentimes it's not. Most of the time, we are not the right people to do it. So let's start there. Alana Johnson asked, last session it was discussed about modern food fats turning to First Nation foods. It was discussed that indigenous foods should not be commodified. However, do you think commodifying some of the foods will help return land to the people? I ask this because right now the tribe that I am on, and that is all it says. You think commodifying some of these foods will help will help return land to the people?
I think that no matter what colonial framework you put onto, continue to heap onto indigenous shoulders, it's going to keep oppressing. Right? There's a reason that our communities don't operate within Western governmental framework, Western agricultural frameworks, all these different things that do not they don't exist within our community in a traditional way, right? So as we're moving back towards, into that re-indigenizing space and decolonizing, is capitalism the answer?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Cool. To answer Damiana Calvario's question, yes, we'll try to send these resources in writing. Okay, from Jennifer. Jennifer from White Earth, Anishinaabe territory, and lives in Ohio, where all the tribes were removed. The practice of rewilding and regeneration has been started here in Ohio, but without reciprocity. Can you describe how people can act with reciprocity? I feel I cannot do this because it's not my traditional land. This is a really hard one.
Hi guys, I'm sorry. I was on the wrong time zone. I'm so sorry. Oh my God. But I can actually address this because I talk to some folks who use the term rewilding all the time. And I have a weird relationship with that word. To me, it's almost like, I suppose as a restoration ecologist, I really have a difficult time with the term wild because it implies that human beings didn't have a relationship to the land, or that we didn't change anything. Whereas, we've had this like really ongoing deep relationship with the land for a long time, with grazing. I mean, we manipulated grazing. We maybe manipulated is the wrong word, but I think you guys know what I mean. We have used fire for generations. We have gardened. I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that a large part of the Amazon, which is supposed to be this wild space, was actually a huge garden. And so I have a weird relationship with the word wild. And so that word rewilding, I think almost has a real colonial sense to it. And it's, to me, I almost equate the word wild with the term savage, which is one of those terms like we can talk about. I know we use it, as people of color, as indigenous people, we use it together, like, oh, you're a total sav or whatever. But I would never allow a white person to use that term with me. So anyway, I guess the term, what I'm saying is that the term rewilding, I have a problem with it because we were never wild, right? And it's almost like calling pieces of land pristine, like we want to return it to a pristine state, which I think is also really colonial.
But that goes to say, the misunderstanding and the erasure of indigenous work. The indigenous history of the United States, there's a chapter where it talks about how European colonists came to the United States, came to the New World, and found these beautiful gardens, right? But these really beautiful gardens and these trails, these connecting routes, people have been working on them for thousands of years. It didn't just happen, right? And there has always been an effort not only to erase that part, but to remove us from the land. In the Mixteco communities, there was Catholicism played a big role on this, but the Spanish literally removed whole towns from our traditional villages, whole towns to a few miles away. So we didn't have a relationship with that land and those ceremonial grounds. and they call them pueblos nuevos, new towns. There's a long history of this if you really look closely. Yes. Well, welcome, Linda.
Thank you, and I'm sorry again, but I want to say that is the whole origin of the national park system, right? That we want to keep things wild is the like basically the origin of it, and that's how we got removed from the entire Yellowstone ecosystem as indigenous people. That's how Native people were removed from that whole ecosystem, is by this idea that somehow we could keep it pristine and wild. I'm sorry, I don't mean to usurp that conversation, Carlos.
Go for it.
But I just wanted to say that, yeah, and like I've worked with the national park systems before, but I have a real, I also have a real issue, and I think we have to change a lot of these things from the inside and work from the inside to change them, but I have a lot of issues with them because of that.
Anything to add to that one, Carlos?
No, that you can get into conservationists since whole nother conversation. I mean, it's an integral part of this conversation too, but it's just, yeah, we have, you have these groups that, it's like the festival circuit when it comes to like the rewilding folks. It's like this really ridiculous, I don't know. Linda said it all. I agree with you 1,000 times over.
It's actually really tough, I think, for us to answer those kinds of questions and talk about like the rewilding movement, and there's others, but without cursing, it's probably it's a challenge.
Great.
I love cursing though.
So since we started talking about that, one of the questions that I was going to ask, or one of the topics that I wanted to touch on, is the fact that we have this really long history of erasing the work, the communities, our relationship to the land, and then eventually we get to modern environmental white supremacy, in which environmental organizations work really, really hard to strip the rights of indigenous peoples, indigenous tribes, indigenous nations of their original right to hunt, gather, and fish.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you look, one of the things I just learned not too long ago, was some of the history of the Sierra Club here in the Southwest, is that they were major proponents of dams and coal mining on indigenous lands, from the get-go, and now they make sure they have indigenous voice in their space, but it wasn't always that way, and all of those groups are major offenders,
right.
So hi, Twyla.
Hi.
Welcome, Twyla.
Hi, Twyla.
Hello.
I was late too.
Okay. Thank you for your patience.
Absolutely. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And for those of you who are watching and don't know who Twyla is an amazing, not only human being, but a mentor to all of us, and really a national treasure. And I don't say that that lightly. How are you doing, Twyla?
I'm doing good. I just got back from checking on plants.
Fantastic. So how are the plants doing?
They're doing good. You got the Palo Verde blossoms going. You've got the, what you call the agaves coming up. You've got the saguaro fruits that are starting to tease the rain. So it's going really great outside.
So one of the questions, you live in the San Carlos Apache Reservation, and I've been very fortunate to be able, in the past, to be able to go there and walk with you and really learn from all the knowledge that you are willing to share. But one of the questions that I have for you that you may or may not want to answer, but San Carlos Apache is the first reservation, the first concentration camp in the U.S. And at some point it was called Hell's 40 Acres.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that if you're willing?
Okay. I'm not correct on dates, accurate dates. It's like one of the first reservations when European contact was coming on the western side of United States, and seeing that Native Americans were just a nuisance and they wanted land. And so creating reservations on different parts of the western region, San Carlos was one of them, where during the Apache Wars, where just anybody that looked native, they were all put into one area. And this is a small area, 40 acres. And you're talking about Pimas, Papagos, people from different Apache tribes that were put together in a small acreage, a small 40 acres of land, and weren't allowed to leave for 20 years. So after 20 years wanting to go home, once the government allowed, lifted that you can go home, there was nothing to go home to. Majority of people stayed in San Carlos. The people that went home to their lands taken away by ranchers that were, even if they tried to go to their land, they were killed. They were killed because now it belonged to these white people or these ranchers or Western people. There are European people that are coming this way for the promised land, where actually is land that's already been here for the people.
Obviously, you come from a community, from a tribe that fought really, really hard until the very end to stay in the land and to be able to live free.
Correct.
You, and my understanding is that your community was before colonizers came, will move around, right, with the seasons.
Oh yes, they were following. People were very mobile. They followed the food season. They followed the harvest season. They followed the different cycles of how you say, we start off with spring, summer, fall, winter, and people not migrated, but they just move all wherever plants grew, and nature told our people where to go. And then paying attention not only to the land, but to the stars, the sun, all the, all those things out there beyond Earth, and just having that really beautiful connection with the land, as well as the stars and the sun and everything that makes us who we are today, and living on this planet. And it was very balanced, a very well balanced connection, and people had respect. So you don't see a lot of footprints left behind by Apaches, because they were taught to respect the land. So you don't see trash, you don't see buildings, you don't see all these other things. People just move with the land. They were just at one with the land. And things just changed to today, where you see me in a carport.
You come from from a family of hunters as well.
Yes.
I know that your brothers were really accomplished hunters. How did you all get started?
For us, we grew into it. Well, not just hunting, but foraging. Foraging was something that my mother grew up with, her family grew up with, my grandparents. It's just something that was part of our life cycle until we went to school. And that's where at school, I didn't know people went to the city, the nearby town, to go eat. I didn't know those things existed. So I went to school. I'm there sitting at home eating, whatever grew in our garden. I was so happy, and that's what we ate. But school meeting people at the school, I started to understand, oh, there's more. There's what over there in a box or in a bag, you know, where we just ate at home. Hunting is something that we've always grown into. And I think, how do you say, it's just been a part of my family's life. So from being from small game hunter to big game hunter to being a well accomplished and recognized hunters throughout, I mean, being world recognized is what, it was just the technique of hunting. It wasn't going out bringing this fifth wheel, bringing all the caterers in. It was just going back to old school. Hey, we're packing it in, we're packing it out, you know, and that's what drew a lot of how you say, celebrities or name people to come out and hunt in this very unique Apache way.
Can you please share a little bit with everyone about the work that you have been doing the last, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, the work of cataloging?
Excuse me, of cataloging? Yes. Okay. So I was born into a family that have always done this, but I didn't really quite respect it when I was growing up as a teenager. Something like, oh my God, my family does this, you know, and I kind of drifted away. And so when I got lost for a while, I tell people I was lost for a while. And when I had my relatives talk with me and work with me and take me out into the mountains to go foraging or to go collect things for baskets, and something just woke up in my spirit or in my senses. Something just woke me up. A whole being woke me up. And learning more, but I wanted to learn so in depth. So I start volunteering with our anthrobotanist for the tribe. And I would follow him around. I was basically almost like a stalker from a far distance. And I'd be so amazed, like, oh my gosh, they're working with so-and-so. And I knew they were like my relatives. And I wanna go with them. So it took a long time to gain that respect with a lot of the elders. It took me about 4 years pretty much to be able to sit and conversate with an elder where I gained that respect enough. We're like, okay, yeah, let's go talk with Twyla, you know, and let's teach her, because it's not just a given. You don't go and say, oh, can I have that? You don't say that. It just took a lot of work. It took a lot of work. I go over there, I bring food, I help clean the yard, I go grocery shopping for them, and I did a lot of things for a lot of these elders, is, you know, even going out and collecting wood for the winter time, but not saying anything, just collecting them and taking over them, because to me they were so knowledgeable with this information that I do anything for them. And so I think they kind of knew that. It took about 4 years of doing this, and they're like, okay, we'll talk to her now. So doing this, but collecting it was very tedious. It took a lot of time. It's actually about 30 years of information, 30 years of work to actually sit and compile everything and put it into a data system. This is 30 years of interviews. It's not just something that happened in 5 years or 10 years. It took a great amount of time.
It's amazing. And obviously the fact that you have to like sit and do your work, and serve your elders and serve your communities is a really foreign concept for a lot of us. They want everything now.
Yes.
They want everything now, and we think that we deserve it, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think that's something that people have forgotten about, is that traditional way of gaining respect is earning it. And it's nothing bought, it's nothing paid. It's actually nothing bought. You can't buy this information. You actually have to gain that respect from elders and to sit with them for them to be very comfortable to talk to you in detail about specific, specific plant medicine, food, seasons, stories, very detailed information and sensitive information. But it took a long time to get to that point. And for me is to put that together and simplify it, put it in a simplified version for young people that can't wait. But yet they're still going to have to go back to elders in the community to get the more in-depth information.
Right. And this is one of the reasons why in the food justice movement, I don't use a food desert anymore. Instead, we use food apartheid, because you can survive harvesting from the desert.
Oh, you definitely can. You can. I mean, people come out here and they'll look at you like, oh my God, how do you live out here? But you come out here, it is abundant with food. No matter where you stand, and Mother Earth will always provide for you. If not medicine, she'll provide water, she'll provide food, no matter where you are. But you have to have that faith in Mother Earth also. And respect for her.
Right. Anything to add? Linda, Carlos?
I was down there, actually I was with Twyla back in, I think it was October or something, down at Wallapai, which was a little different, but similar to where she lives. And I've been to the desert before, but I was so amazed at just the delicious food, you know, the wild onions and the prickly pear and the banana yucca and, you know, things that I love. And so, yeah, since then, I've definitely thought twice about referring to deserts as places that don't have any food. And also, like, you know, it's kind of like that whole Trump also said, I think that it's an interesting discussion to think about places that we think do not produce food or do not support indigenous people and indigenous lives. The desert is one place and swamps are another. Remember, Trump was constantly talking about draining the swamp, like swamps were bad things that we had to get rid of. Whereas, you know, there have been indigenous people living in the swamps for thousands of years, thriving there with amazing food. And swamp food is fantastic food. So, yeah, I really appreciate highlighting the diversity of those areas.
So we are, you know, we're gonna, I have a couple of questions for all of you, and then we'll take them, we'll answer some of the questions that people are asking, and I'm gonna prioritize indigenous people's names that I recognize, so everyone knows that. So now that we talked a little bit about a historical perspective on land knowledge. We're really talking about a long history from genocide to land scorching, forced removal into reservations, our children being stolen and taken into the residential school, the Indian Relocation Act, masquerade as an adult vocational training program, and the overall stigma of not only being indigenous, but also being poor and living from the land, right? There has always been a stigma to that. So based on all of this, why is it important to all of you to be outside, to have this knowledge, to pass this knowledge on to next generations? Twyla?
Okay, hold on. Okay, go ahead. Okay. Can you repeat that again? My earphone went click, click.
So there's been a long history of indigenous people from genocide to being put in reservations, and all the trauma that comes with our children being stolen. Why is it important for you, for all of us, to be able to to be in communion with the land, to have this knowledge.
Why is it important? Mostly having this knowledge is important as Indigenous people is one of the greatest gifts of healing any Native individual, anyone that's very connected to the land, is we have a gift that we are blessed with that many people will never understand and will try their best to comprehend. But having the ability to heal, but with today's, like with what's going on today, we have a gift of sharing. You know, a lot of things have changed through time where this knowledge is gonna help us survive this, how you say, pandemic, and how I can see it just really supporting a lot of people. I guess Native people is a part of survival in what people are saying. You know, I can't say we're poor. Poor is stereotyped. I think from my understanding is if you have no one to pray for you, then that's how we say Bausineja. But we have people praying for us. We're not poor. Being able to support yourself without buying was once deemed as poor. But now it's like you're so wealthy with that knowledge of having to be able to support yourself. I think I kind of got lost on that question, so let me skip it to Carlos.
Yeah, no, I think that was I don't know. I mean, I can't say this enough times for people out there that don't know who Twyla is. She's like the sun in my life, for real. Her work it's something that every Indigenous community in this side of the world should look to. Like, it's that important. But to touch back on what she said about healing, you know, for myself, that's what it's always been. There was a time when I was really, really, really lost in this life and fell into all the traps that they set for us, you know, and it wasn't until I came back to that information. It wasn't until I went back to the plants that my grandparents taught me about. It wasn't until I sat with them and I remember the conversations, and I remember that I remember smelling soil in my grandfather's hands, you know, and I remember all those things that matter, you know. And so would it really just come that connectivity? There's nothing else like it. You know, it's part of our DNA. You know, it's like written in our cells, and our people's cosmologies are written from it. You know, so it's I think it's just that's all I got.
Linda?
Yeah. I mean, Twyla, you felt like you went off, but you know, you always speak to the right thing always with what you say. And yeah, I just love listening to you guys. But one thing, I guess, you know, just to bring it back to ethics a little bit, I know that non-native people have big concerns about, like, well, how do I connect here? And how do I become an ally? Or how do I go out and harvest plants in a good way on this land? And I think that we'll probably talk about, so I won't get into it too much now until Neff, until you bring it up.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm sure we're going to talk about, like, should non-native people be harvesting our traditional foods? You know, that's a basic question, and I think one that we can all talk about. But, you know, I have a lot of non-native friends who are like, how do I connect here? And the truth is, you'll never connect to here the way that we connect to here, to this land. Because the fact is, our ancestors make up the soil. I mean, you know what I mean? Like this, we're connected to this place in a way that I think non-native people cannot fathom, cannot even imagine. That doesn't mean that you cannot appreciate, that you cannot be an ally, that you can still help us take care of this place. And, you know, it doesn't mean you're completely disconnected. It just means you can't connect to this place in the way that I can, in the way that I think we as Indigenous people can. You know, but like I said, that doesn't mean you can't have some sort of connection. So I just wanted to put that out there, just because I think that that's a real, I keep seeing that as a theme of the questions that we get asked. But if we want to talk about, you know, plants and how people can harvest plants in a good way too, we can talk about that.
Well, let me ask you, what about our Black brothers and sisters whose ancestors came here as slaves, were stolen from another continent, and whose blood is also in the soil, in the land?
For myself, well, okay, I'm sorry. For myself, people are connected in different ways. No matter what ethnicity anyone is, there's a connection in some form. The way I explain it to a lot of people is, it's just the respect that, I'm only going to speak for myself, the respect that I gain for this land was taught to me by my elders, my parents, my relatives, the people of the community that I service. Foraging, I think, is, I can't say it's a religion. I can't say that. I don't like to compare anything to religion, but there's something more for every individual when they go out there and touch the dirt, when they touch the land, and they actually are out there foraging and they're healing in some way. Many of us are coping with so much in all levels of health that allowing ourselves to go out there and forage. And there's something that I say, plants are like doctors. They're healing you in a different way than a person with prescriptions will be healing you. And that's about my only take I can really say. I'm kind of fuzzy, but I'm looking at this tree, and this tree is like talking to me, trying to explain this to me. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I think that goes back. I mean, you guys weren't on earlier when we were having this discussion, but there's so much connectivity between indigeneity and the African American, you know, that we had a question earlier, Linda and Twyla, was in reference to something very similar, you know, and about, I guess, how do you, in that instance, come back to you know, find that place of being, and how our race relations are so divisive, and how we're working forward with that, right? But I think it's really, this is some years ago now, it's almost 5 years back. I was in New Orleans, and I was sitting with Priestess Miriam, who is the voodoo queen of New Orleans, and I was sitting in her private temple, and we were conversating, just sitting on the floor, discussing, and she said, well, I had some people that were coming by to pick some stuff up, you know, go ahead and do what you're doing, you know, come out whenever you're ready. All around us were these different offerings, right? These different, you know, saints and people and all these things. But behind her personal space, there was another altar. And in that altar, when she left, I kept getting like this pull, right? I was like, what is over there? And I walked over there, and it was all indigenous people. And I sat with it for a really long time. I just sat there, and I said, this is really powerful, because this is her personal thing. And the time I took my corn pollen off my neck and I put it on an altar, and I left up front, and I asked her about it. I said, tell me about this altar you have back here. And she said, it's my lineage. And it's part of the lineage of voodoo in the South, was that Black Kettle was a stop on the Underground Railroad. And so a lot of slaves went through there. And because of the medicine that was being worked in those camps was so similar to what they left, they got really mixed, you know, and it's like those kind of stories and those histories that we don't get and that are missing, you know. Indigeneity isn't a solitary thing, right? If you look at how were people adopted into tribes, right? You have people that went to war just to go get other warriors to treat them so good that they would want to stay with this other tribes. You know what I mean? Like these are the stories, I mean, that I think come to that connectivity, and not only for our African American brothers and sisters, but for colonizers all the way around. How do you become part of the tribe? Right? And so I think that, you know, when it comes to that conversation, we need to reckon with our anti-Blackness and indigenous communities, you know, and tribes like the Cherokee freedmen, and all of those histories, you know, that they've been pushed to the side, and there's this never-ending battle, right? And it's all race politics instead of it actually being like, hey, this is who we were, this is what we are, and this is what we can become.
As well, we have to also reckon with the especially in social movements, progressive social movements, we have to reckon and reconcile the fact that a lot of social movements erase indigenous peoples as well by not inviting us to the table, but by not recognizing, by not reaching out. So it goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. Linda, let's bring it back to you and the ethics of wildcrafting and foraging. do you think can people that are not indigenous do it sustainably, ethically?
Yeah. So, okay. Did you say me? Okay. I just wanted to make sure. So, yeah, I really love this this question and this discussion because I was harvesting ramps the other day, Allium trichocum, and it was actually a really interesting. They are a traditional food for my tribe, for the Catawba. They're even traditional for my mother's side over in Asia. And then they're also a really important traditional food for the Lakota and the Dakota and the Nakota, but they don't grow right here in the Dakotas where I live. We have to travel like we did before or trade because they grow further east of here. So it was interesting because I actually had a friend who lives further east say, why are you all coming over here and collecting our ramps? This was another indigenous person saying this to me and my family. And it's like, wait a minute, you know, this is a traditional food. This is where the Lakota and the Dakota have traveled to forever and used to live actually forever to harvest these. But also, it was a big concern because I was posting about sustainable ways to harvest ramps. And there was a big concern from Native people that non-Native people would go into those areas and over-harvest. And so I think that something that I would ask of our non-Indigenous allies, and I don't know why, but for some reason, I never think about, I never exclude people of color when I'm talking about those, when I'm talking about traditional foods. We can have that discussion, but it's just something that never even occurs to me to exclude them from that discussion. I lived on the East Coast for a while and worked with Gullah communities. And I always, you know, considered them to have just as much right to those traditional foods there as what I have as a Native American. Anyway, so what I ask of my non-Native friends is, hey, leave the ramps for Native people as much as possible, unless you know you have a good place to harvest them sustainably, perhaps on your own land. These are pickled ramps. These are actually pickled in soy sauce. They're delicious. But, you know, so that's what I would ask is that leave those. There are plenty of other types of wild onions and wild garlic that are a lot more plentiful and less sensitive to harvesting, and that you can turn to if you like that. Or you can grow tons of garlic chives in your yard and use them in a similar way. I think that there are ways to ask people to be allies when it comes to harvesting traditional plants and traditional foods that are not disruptive or divisive. But I'd like you guys to give your thoughts on that too.
Go ahead, Carlos or Twyla.
Carlos.
Yeah, I mean the commodification of medicine, you know, and like the selling of medicine is so insane, and extremely profitable. You know, there was some years back, it's been about 10 years now, 9 years, that up here in one of our sacred mountains, the Forest Service busted a guy with a pickup truck bed full of bear root, something near 500 pounds, you know, which just decimates the entire populace of this plant. Takes 10 years, right? For OSHA to grow is a 10-year process. And this guy went and cleared out, you know, hundreds of years of growth, just camping over the weekend, right? And then the Forest Service didn't say, "Oh, give this to indigenous people." They took it to like the New Age white herbalist shop over in Durango and gave it all to them because they didn't know what to do with it, right? So, I mean, you can't expect people to maintain boundaries to their livelihood. People are gonna do what they do. We talked about it last week, Neff, with the Limpos. Like people sell ceremony, people sell medicine. But is it ethical? No. But how do we stop it? Like how does that come? Like where do we come to a place where people have enough respect and honor for themselves that they don't do something like that? So, I mean, for ourselves, there's ways to harvest. I just had a friend of mine in Ohio send me some ramps. I saw they were foraging ramps, and I said, "Oh man, it's been years since I've had ramps." Because they don't grow here anywhere near here. And he said, "Oh, do you want the bulbs?" And I said, "No, I don't want the bulbs, man." I was like, I don't need all that, right?
Right.
It's that simple.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the commodification. And I'm sure a lot of white people that benefit from medicine making are going to watch this or are watching this. Is there an opportunity, is there an opportunity for as you said, Carlos, people make a lot of money with traditional knowledge out there. What about, is there an opportunity for reparations? Is that even, I know that Twilight has been doing amazing work and it's not compensated for all of the knowledge that she carries.
Mm-hmm.
Carlos, something I wanted to say when you were talking about the person who was picking all the OSHA and they gave the OSHA to the New Age shop. Like the thing that occurred to me is that, there should be something in place when we're talking about reparations where that person has to replant tons of it. You know what I mean? Double what they harvested. And I feel the same way about people who do not harvest ramps in a good way, who are taking the whole bulb and the roots. They should have to replant, or do plantings of those traditional foods that they haven't harvested in a good way. And I also wanted to, this is probably a question more than it is a statement, but so I know someone who owns a bunch of land, and OSHA bare root grows on their land, and they harvest it sustainably and they sell it to non-native people. When native people ask him for some, he always gives it to them for free. So the question is that okay?
Mm. No.
No.
For myself, when it comes to something in that form, not bartering, but let's say an individual needed an ingredient, he'll send me corn or he'll send prayers. Most I'll ask for prayers, offer your prayers. That for me, that's a payment. For some, you're looking at the amount of time it took to get just 2 cups of something, okay? Like 2 cups of seeds. You're going to go a long ways. You're going to need gas, yes. You're going to need something in case your tire goes out. There's compensation for that. I understand that for some people that are, I can't say there's not a lot of people making a living on it, but those that go and collect, let's say for acorn big here in my side of town, in my Apache community, Acorn is so huge, and it's like how you're mentioning how you have different community or different tribes will say, oh, that's why are you harvesting here, you know, and that happens in our community, like don't harvest that tree, you know, that's our tree. I'll get into some conversations like that in some areas, but a lot of people depend on it is not only for sustainability, but it's also economically helping them because they sell it within our own tribal members. They sell it among each other. Very few people will want to buy acorn. If some of you eat an acorn, it's not the best tasting thing to other people. But for us, it's like, oh my gosh, that's acorn. So we understand the amount of work and time it is collecting these nuts and cleaning and preparing them, because it's not something that you can just buy. It's something that takes a lot of time to go and collect. So I think it has, it's give and take. It's give and take. It's all individual, I believe. But Mother Earth is so giving, you know. We go out here. I've taken, I don't know if I took Nafetali out there to the Bear Canyon, where it's just a feel and feel and feel. There's like miles of onion. It doesn't end. And Carlos has been there. I know Carlos has gone there, and they come back no matter how much you take, but you take it in a good way. Next season, you'll see more there than was there then. You know, Mother Earth is so giving. So my taking is a little bit different than a lot of other people, I believe. Okay.
So let me take a little break here. Are you all okay staying 10, 15 minutes over?
Oh, yes.
Yes? Perfect. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for doing that. And also a reminder to everyone that is watching, I just put the Venmos for Carlos, for Linda, and you can Venmo me, and I will make sure that Twyla gets it. As always, this is a free webinar, mainly because we believe the I Collective believes that we should be doing more for our communities. And so we will figure out how to make it happen. Now, if everyone is cool with this, I want to honor relatives that made the email questions, and also some of the Native people that are asking questions here. So the first question that I have for everyone, and this is very relevant for all of our communities, how do you address wildcrafting in areas that are contaminated by pollution, where potential wildcrafting may do more harm than good? And this came from Vanessa.
Okay, for wildcrafting, I live in an area, I live in San Carlos, so in the 1960s, there was Agent Orange sprayed in a vast majority of our land during in our water source, and which is the river that maintained all the farms at that time. And along that river also grew, it was so plentiful with medicine and roots and edible plants that people didn't know Agent Orange was being sprayed on them, and sprayed at least about 8 miles of the river. So all of that really, took its toll on people's lives, because people in the 60s still lived outside. So a lot of our food was outside, our dried food were outside. They were sprayed with Agent Orange. People didn't understand what Agent Orange was, and they thought they were just dying from, the sickness because of the wild food. And Christianity came and saying that, a lot of these food, is used at the ceremonies, and, this is why you're dying. But finding out more and doing research on it is understanding that this is a time of transition for a lot of people. When Agent Orange came, Christianity was really coming up in our community, and different religious groups were coming up. And so it kind of took a step back from this, but now it's reteaching people where you can forage. And that's what my full-time job is going to all these different landscapes throughout our communities, through 4 different tribal communities, which is White Mountain, Camp Verde, Payson, and San Carlos, and retracing those steps and actually finding the areas that are safe, that doesn't have these contaminated chemicals affecting the land, but really having to analyze. And you're working not only with elders, but you're also working with the Forest Service. You're working with different ethnobotanists. You're working with different botanists and getting really good information on a lot of these land areas where you're able to forage. And that's what I do, is going back, retracing the steps, but letting people know, yes, that is a safe area, to go foraging from. And it does take a lot of work. It's not something really simple, and it's doing your homework. It's really doing your homework within your community. If it's something you want to do, you're gonna go ask questions. Is there anything that happened in this land? Was there anything spilled here? Was there, other chemical exposures to this place? But learning a lot about that, and just, again, retracing those steps to where it's safer to walk on.
I'll just give my really quick answer to this question. I want to be clear. I'm not saying anyone should go out and harvest plants on a brownfield site or from the ditches of the interstate, because those are not good ideas. But there were some apple trees, for example, growing just on the outskirts of Minneapolis recently. Where was that? Actually, it might have been around Mystic Lake Casino, now that I think about it. There were some apple trees growing out there. They were crab apples. And someone said, I don't know if I should harvest those beautiful crab apples that were at perfect ripeness, because I'm not sure if they spray them. And the thing is if you come across a crabapple tree that's growing in the lawn of like a casino or an area like that, the chances are they've sprayed it with one thing, and they probably spray it 2, maybe 3 times a year. Apples that you get in the grocery store are sprayed constantly, and with like this soup of sometimes 20, 25 different herbicides, pesticides, and fungicides. So I look at it that way. It's almost like a balancing act. Like, are the dandelions you're picking out of someone's yard who sprayed their yard 5 years ago, are they really going to be more polluted than the lettuce you're buying from a bag in the grocery store? Probably not. So I'm not as much of a stickler. I will eat stuff that's growing in people's lawns, even if they sprayed the year before or 2 years before that. And that's just because I do a lot of urban foraging as well. And so I always think of it that way. It's like, really, is this thing I'm foraging, is it more polluted than what I would get in the grocery store? And the chances are no.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's all. It's all going to be like your region. I mean, we here in the Southwest, we have the remnants of uranium mines and bomb testing and coal mines and oil and gas industry. NASA constantly monitors the methane cloud that rolls over the Four Corners area. And so it's not like there's places you can't grow food, right? There's places you can't harvest food. And so, it's a lot like Twyla said, you have to learn what happened where. Half of these canyons here had some type of uranium mining here, or they had some extractive industry in place. And, we have entire populaces of indigenous folks here that have been forcefully removed from their land within the last 50, 60 years, and still, look at Black Mesa and it's still in resistance right now, this minute. And So, you know, it's a difficult thing. I mean, and I forage I mean, I'm blessed to travel a lot, right? So we're like across the country, constantly foraging, but from here, I have like I don't know, 800-mile radius, you know, and so it's like you have to exist as our people did, in motion, you know, and so and on top of that, you know, just have to like really understand what your landscape has been through and where it's at in its healing as well.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So let's try to do a few more questions really quick. A relative named Emily asks, do you have any advice for grassroots folks working on further engaging and educating their communities about ethnobotany, obviously with no funding?
Okay, repeat that question.
Do you have any advice for someone to work in their community on ethnobotany with no funding?
Yes, you can do that. You can start with your elders, starting community, starting a journal, starting how you say a circle group with people that you know have a lot of this, that have retained a lot of the older knowledge. But to start collecting data, you're going to look at, like, if you're going to be waiting on funding, you know, you're going to be waiting, and funding isn't guaranteed. And just being able to step ahead and, you know, step forward and say, I'm going to do this, you know, and it's already there. Once you start, you're going to be thankful that you did, because if it's funding that you're waiting on, it's not going to happen for a while. And a lot of these elders are just leaving us daily, and this isn't going to come back. You can't bring them back and ask for information. So being able to collect that on your own at this time, like for myself, this information was collected for 30 years. We didn't get funding for like 20 years later. So it does take time and a lot of patience.
Thank you, Twyla. Anybody else, or should we move to the next one? Next one. Okay, so this one came from a young person that did not grow up in her community, but it is a card-carrying member of one of the largest tribes. And they sent a few different questions, and I'll be happy to share the whole email with every one of you. But one that I want you all to answer, or maybe some of you to answer, is how honeybees can help heal Native people and native land. Now, my observation of, correct me if I'm wrong, most honey that we harvest is not native, right? I'm only in the one town in central Mexico that still carries on the tradition of native bees.
Yeah, the honeybee question. You know, it's like last week we were talking about foraging, and I say, you know, when I teach colonialism through plants. You know, a honeybee goes right into that storyline, right? I think it's one honeybee collects like 300 times what one of our indigenous bees collect. So that means that one solitary bee, which the majority of our bees are, has to compete with an entire hive for survival, which continuously displaces our bees, not to mention the disease rate in hives that gets transported to our indigenous species. It's a definitive mirror of colonization.
I totally agree with that. And I'm someone who, I love honey, and I appreciate the medicinal properties of honey, just as I can appreciate my non-Indigenous brothers and sisters who are out there. But if you really want to help indigenous communities of human beings, and if you really want to help native plant species, if you really want to help native communities, support native bee species. It's just a fact. And not just native bees, but native pollinators in general. There are many plants that, like there's a species of yucca that grows here on the prairies of North Dakota, and there is one moth, one insect that pollinates that plant, and that is the only plant that insect pollinates. So they have a really important relationship, and without one or the other, you know, they're screwed. So support native pollinators, support native bees. It's really simple. You can just make a log with a bunch of nail holes in it, or a board with a bunch of nail holes in it, because they do live in solitary compartments. So, you know, it's really easy to do, and that supports native plant species, which of course supports native people.
Thank you, Bob. I have another question for Mariana Harvey. How do you feel about sharing or harvesting indigenous foods when non-indigenous are part of the audience, and do so in a lens that doesn't encourage non-indigenous people to put more pressure on wild indigenous foods?
We touched on this last conversation, you know, and I'll just go back to that. Hi, Mariana. Miss you guys. I think that, you know, I'll just repeat what I said last week, is that people have repeatedly shown us they cannot be trusted with information. There's a lot of our tech as indigenous people that is not ready for transfer to white people. Like, that's just as plain as I can say it. You know, we're talking about, I can have a conversation with somebody in the local, you know, peace, lovey-dove community, New Ager community that, you know, has total and utmost respect for plants in that way. But if I say, hey, you shouldn't be harvesting that, like with OSHA in particular, like, no, you guys should probably just leave that alone, you know? But I have this beautiful connection, and I talk to this plant, and I da-da-da-da-da. Right? If that doesn't just, you know, define the whole thing, I don't know what does, you know? And what I was saying last week was, you know, there was a tribe in Brazil that there was something that they were using for people with cancer to heal, you know, to help them heal. And pharma came in, displaced this people completely from their home so they can harvest and practice on this plant, you know, and those are the things. So, I mean, you have to, you know, I mean, I think it goes, I saw somebody talking in the chat about the invasivore movement, you know, and I think that's kind of the push that I would suggest, you know, like, your people's plants came with you. And they had some context and some knowledge for your people at one time before they just were weeds. So how do you find your place back to that? They're here. You're here. You know, take the time to learn each other again.
In other words, don't trust colonizers. Anything to add? Twyla?
It's a very, for myself, we don't have that in this community. A lot of the information stays in the community. Mm-hmm. And same as medicinal wise, like for myself, people will ask me about, you know, the medicinal purpose of whatever plant, you know, they'll name a plant, and out of respect for the healers and the elders and those that practice with it, I can't comment on it, but we keep it where it is, and we live in a more not as advanced as other communities, So I think a lot of respect is still, you know, playing its role here, is keeping it with the people that know about the plant. You know, yeah, there's food you can eat, but yet there's some of those food that contains medicinal properties. But if a person doesn't know the medicinal part of it, you know, that's cool with me. You know, I'm not violating or stepping boundaries with my elders and the healers.
But I guess overall, would you all agree that a lot of people are asking where on the comments where to take this class, where to take that class, and as we said last week, you know, this is not knowledge that many people that are gonna watch this should be privy to, should have, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, for my personal self, what I'm saying, you know, is that, I mean, I can just keep repeating it. Like if you're not of this place, your people's stuff came with you, you know, like that's the truth, you know, and learning those medicine ways and those plant ways is crucial for your healing here, because you can't really pay respects and honor this place and in the indigenous species and the indigenous peoples of this place if you don't even have a knowledge or an acceptance or an understanding of those that came with you.
And as someone who works with medicinal plants, even more than I do edible plants, I can tell you absolutely 100% that for every important medicinal plant that that I have a spiritual connection with, or that other native people here have a spiritual connection with, there's a plant out there that will do similar things, that's invasive, and that we're fine with them collecting, with you collecting, you know. It's like I was saying, I didn't know why a lot of non-native people were going out and harvesting sage to burn as an antimicrobial in their homes, when they could just as easily burn rosemary, or, you know, I mean, there's other plants that they could just as easily be burning, that
Yes.
that they, you know, where they don't have to infringe upon the rights of native people to have access to their traditional medicines.
Thank you all. As always, we never have enough time for these conversations, but there's one more question here that I want to touch on, but
there's my forehead.
People that are asking questions on the thread, the iCollective will be really, really happy to host a private conversation about some of your questions. One, because I think that it's important to create safe spaces, but also some of these questions some people are asking shouldn't be discussed in public.
Yes.
But the last question, there's a question here by Anonymous. They probably missed the beginning of our conversation. It's what are the panelists doing to actively include Black people in these collective spaces and working through anti-Blackness in those spaces? And as I said, Anonymous probably missed the conversation, but I will answer for myself. I personally have been doing my best to work with my Black and Brown, Asian, and people of color folk in the Northeast, along with Leah Pennyman, a bunch of other amazing organizers. We created the People of Color Land Trust. As part of the collective, we have hosted talks, dinners, conferences with people from Palestine, Black activists, and everyone else. Carlos, Twyla, anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, I'm in rural nowhere. So, you know, I live in the center of Trumpville. And, you know, people of color in this region, there's the indigenous, you know, I mean, there's the Res, we're surrounded by Ute Mountain, Navajo, and Southern Ute. And then there's border towns. And anybody who's familiar with border towns and all the mayhem that comes along with them for indigenous people, that's where I'm at. And so, our community here in the region, for POC is pretty strong, and I think, unfortunately, if we have a meeting, we have a Leaders of Color group here, that we try to meet once or twice a month, and I think there's only, 5 African descent, and that's just the demographic here, right? But those are all conversations that we have, right? And those are things that we're building towards building each other, and dismantling the white supremacist ideologies that have been fucking imprinted on us. And that's that, like we all have, Neff said it earlier, and a lot of people, in that movement know that this is multi-generational work. When I talk about colonization here in the Southwest, and like I said, I can go backwards from Colorado to the United States to Mexico to, like that's how far the steps go. You just it continually just keeps going back through colonization. And so, I mean, we got a lot of work as POC to really embrace each other and build moving forward. But I'll tell you this, the work that's being done it's super. It's creating some of the most amazing connections, and what Neftali and Leah and them are doing up there in the Northeast is a beautiful model.
Amazing.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you all for joining me, for joining the iCollective. I really, really appreciate all of your work, everything that you all do in your communities. And for everyone that is still watching, please, Venmo Linda, Venmo Carlos. Thank you all. And we'll continue this conversation another time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have a good one.
See you guys.
Thank you, Twyla.
Thank you.
Thank you, Twyla. It's so good to see your face.
Oh, it's good to see you guys. I'm glad you guys all are safe. Stay safe out there. And we'll do this all together sometime when this is over.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally.
I love you guys. You have a good one.
Love you guys. See ya.